This work documents a manuscript by the historian Jean Nostradamus, corresponding to what will be the first official history of Provence, now French. Nostradamus claims to have found a document in which it is said that the Saracens, in the time of Charlemagne, settled in Provence under the leadership of the king of Tartary, Troy the Great and half of Europe, whom Charlemagne defeated and Christianized. But the official story instead says otherwise. It is believed that the Saracens came from the Middle East through North Africa, reached Provence, but were repelled by Charlemagne's ancestors. Charlemagne did not convert them to Christianity, but forced them to retreat further south, where they established a caliphate that will be remembered as Al-Andalus. On the other hand, those who settled in Provence were the Visigoths, coming from the border with Tartary, who did become Christianized, but before Charlemagne arrived. On the other hand, the reference to Troy is anachronistic, if one believes the official history, which states that Troy ceased to exist as such more than 1,000 years earlier. But this detail is curious, because official history, on the other hand, states that the Franks came from Troy, as Nostradamus points out. That is to say, Nostradamus talks about a similar story, but apparently disordered in time and the identities of its protagonists. It is, therefore, a document that aligns with the new chronology of Fomenko and Nosovskiy to the extent that, through other studies and reasoning, it affirms the same thing as what was documented by Nostradamus and gives it sense. To situate the listener, say that the new chronology is a scientific current that, through astronomical science, statistical technique, and other tools, demonstrates that ancient history is medieval and that medieval history is shorter and closer than what it says the official history. In this sense, it is important to understand that its analysis requires becoming familiar with another mental map of history. Approaching the new chronology requires understanding history in a different way and realizing that official history and the sacred text have been manipulated. That is, it requires knowing biblical and medieval stories, knowing how to interpret them, and having the ability to question them. Whoever wants to have more information can search for it on the internet or on this channel. Likewise, this work is part of the research that, as a selfless collaboration, develops the X-185 hypothesis, led by Andrew Marful, which has been supervised by Fomenko and Nosovskiy. Finally, to close this introduction, just indicate that, in this video, a single image will be used, the one that can be seen on the screen, to which the audio narration will refer promptly. It contains 6 bibliographical references, which will be cited as reference number 1, number 2, number 3, etc. Returning to the common thread of this way of approaching the new chronology as a contextualization, say that the Nostradamus are a family very close to the historian Joseph Justus Scaliger, who is the one who officially designs the official chronological map, which openly questions the indicated new chronology. Scaliger's father was a patron of the well-known Michel Nostradamus, Latinized as Nostradamus, famous for his prophecies, who is the brother of Jean Nostradamus, the author of the manuscript. It is, therefore, relevant. In this sense, it is worth highlighting that, to understand its importance, it is essential to see history in another way. In fact, in a totally different way than the official one, but not meaningless. A story that, in its final section, solves what is probably the best-kept mystery of all humanity, that of the true identity of the Jewish Mary Magdalene, who tradition places precisely in Provence. Let us begin. The manuscript of Jean Nostradamus is a set of handwritten notes in which the history of Provence is described, fitting it with the official calendar, but it does not provide the sources and is written with a clear intention of not mentioning the nature of Jewish power from the land that, in the Middle Ages, occupied Provence to Bordeaux, with Jewish capital in Narbonne, and also to hide the Occitan roots, which are not discussed, to write a French and Christian history in its place. Reference number 1E. This is the draft of a singular chapter of the European project of writing history typical of the time, which Caesar Nostradamus, the son of the well-known Nostradamus, completes now, with sources and as an encyclopedic book, which is published in the official year of 1614. Reference number 2. The first document is an incomplete draft, although it contains the essentials, and the second is impressive and scrupulously documented in great detail. Between these two versions, as the new chronology is understood, a pattern of creation of false official documentation can be seen, which has filled the ecclesiastical, royal, and imperial archives. That is, first the idea of the document is created with a temporal guide and main characters, and then the document is filled with minor themes, to which artificial documentary veracity is given. But the first manuscript of Jean Nostradamus, which is highlighted here, despite having the desire to distort what happened, or to hide historical reality under a new manipulated reality, provides a spectacular episode that official history has discarded for recklessness, which is recovered here. The episode deals with the Christian roots of what is known as Occitania, where the Cathars were also. It occupies a territory from Provence to Bordeaux, highlighting Toulouse, as well as Barcelona, Narbonne, Carcassonne, Montpellier, Arles, and Avignon. It is an area that was known in the Middle Ages as Gothia, that is, with the same name as another Gothia, located in the north of the Black Sea, where Karaite Jews descended from the ancient Khazars were found. Along these lines, it should be noted that here there is a triple coincidence: Gothia, the Khazars, and the Cathars, and the Jews. It is widely known and accepted, although little recognized in history books, that Occitan Gothia was a Jewish fiefdom. In this sense, we must highlight the existence of other research work that corroborates this. Arthur Zuckerman, in 1972, published a book where he demonstrated that the original powers of the county of Toulouse, which official history relates to Charlemagne in the name of William of Toulouse, were those of Jewish exilarchs from Babylon, descendants of King David. That is, royal, biblical lineage. According to documents, these exilarchs created a principality in Narbonne, from whose lineage the county of Toulouse was born. And, on the other hand, from the powers of Toulouse arise the powers of the counties of Carcassonne and Barcelona, the capital of the Catalans, as official history also recognizes. This information is based on medieval European documentation and other Persian and Arabic research. Reference number 3. This work therefore sheds light, since official history recognizes that, since the Visigoth invasion of Occitania, a diocese was created in Narbonne from which the Iberian Peninsula was occupied, before the Visigoths moved their capital first to Barcelona, and then to Toledo. That is, another contradiction is observed. In Narbonne a power is born, which official history makes Christian, while Zuckerman, based on original and contrasted documentary sources, makes it eminently Jewish. Here, then, is a manipulation. Nostradamus manuscript is written in Provençal and can be read as Old Catalan with French tics. The interest lies in the story it tells about the nature of the aforementioned powers. In this manuscript, there is unpublished information, which provides news of the conquest of Europe by the Tatar power, but at another historical moment. Along these lines, other historical documents point in this direction, one from the famous scientist Isaac Newton, and the other from a Hispanic chronicler. As has already been indicated in previous works, Isaac Newton points to the chatty and Alana nature of the Catalans, reference number 4. And this data is interesting beyond the fact that it points to another theory other than the official one, in a way that cannot be coincidence. The chatty, in the biblical text and other sources, are also known as the Hittites, coming from the Near East, being the neighboring power of ancient Egypt and its main opponent in the times of the pharaohs. That is to say, it openly dialogues with Jewish roots, and it may well be a clear reference to the Jewish people that Zuckerman has investigated. That is, different sources talk about the same thing, if you analyze carefully. On the other hand, it has also been documented that the chronicler Diego Fernández de Mendoza relates the Catalans and the Aragonese with the conquerors of Asia, reference number 5. That is, there are two sources that point to the Tatar powers associated, in this case, with Occitania through the Catalans, apart from the information provided by Nostradamus, which Zuckerman later expands on. By way of clarification, the Catalans are, therefore, a people descended from this original Tatar power, which at the time occupied Occitania, that is, Gothia, which reached as far as Barcelona, before expanding in the name of other kingdoms and counties. Understanding this, the Nostradamus manuscript points in the same direction, that is, it is not, at all, a historical and documentary anachronism. But this time he points to the Tatar power, Toulouse and Occitania, although he is not the lineage of King David, like Zuckerman, but king of Tartary, Troy, and half of Europe. If one does not know the new chronology, it seems surprising that Jean Nostradamus explains that the Saracens occupied these lands, led by the king of Tartary, who was also king of Troy the Great and king of Galicia, which is not Spanish Galicia, but an ancient kingdom located between the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea, that is, land of Ashkenazi Jews. The king is called Tresin, and it is said that he was known among the Saracens as the most powerful of all nations, just like the great Khans. And this fact is also surprising, since official history says that Saracen power penetrates Western Europe from North Africa, coming from Egypt, and led by Musa ben Nasser, popularly known as the Moor Musa. And Musa means Moses. So this Moses, who comes from Egypt and arrives with the Saracens to Occitania, is also the power of the king of Tartary, who already occupies half of Europe from the east and comes with Jewish power. Wow, it seems like a carbon copy of biblical facts, or, conversely, is the Bible based on these facts? Logically, for those who have never heard of this story, this reconstruction of the events will be impossible to believe. But this is the great truth that the new chronology shows. The biblical facts should be understood in the Middle Ages. Furthermore, the deeds of Charlemagne are those of the Jewish exodus from Egypt, where Canaan, before Jerusalem, is Occitania. And, what may be even more difficult to accept, the deeds of Moses, which are those of Charlemagne, are also those of Genghis Khan's European conquest. Hard to believe. Clear. But that's how it is. The difficult thing is not to understand it, because it is simple, but to believe it. In this sense, please accept it, at least as an assumption, to follow the thread of this story. Surely, many of those who listen to it will connect the dots. Let's move on. As an added contextualization, it is worth clarifying that official history has created an artificial Tatar conquest of the West in the name of the incursions of the Scythians, the Huns, the Alans, the Goths, the Ostrogoths, and the Visigoths prior to Charlemagne. But this whole story is an invasion that must be understood driven by the lineage of Genghis Khan. That is to say, it retains a certain honesty, but two stories, or rather three, separated in time, have been created from one. The story to follow is that of Genghis Khan and his almighty lineage, which, as will be described below, will be the power of God's chosen people. For those who are not aware of the epic lineage of Genghis Khan, say that, officially, he occupied almost all of Eurasia. It is the origin of the power of Great Russia, and this same Tatar power occupied Egypt. Everything, together with the power of Prester John, Carate, with whom he becomes powerful. The Prester is a great priest equal to the power of the Pope of Rome, a Prester John that historians ignore, but who ruled throughout the Middle Ages, from Ethiopia, and a Prester John, who on ancient maps appears with attire that today is said to be that of the Pope of Rome, such as the tiara with the 3 crowns and the triple papal cross, as it is documented at the end of this video. A Prester John who, on the other hand, and to make things even more complicated, has artificially split himself with the lineage of the emperors of Ethiopia, who call themselves descendants of the biblical King Solomon and Sheba, that is, descendants of King David. This is official history, and it is the history of the biblical lineage. Their struggle is that of the Hebrew people. For this reason, the Ethiopian emperors, that is, the lineage of Prester John, Gard, in Aksum, Ethiopia, the Ark of the Covenant of Solomon, an alliance that unites all humanity under the star of King David. Genghis Khan was King David of the Jews, according to medieval chronicles. The Great Tartary would be, in some way, the kingdom of Judea, led by King David, who defeats Goliath, the barbarian power. And he defeats it thanks to gunpowder. Conclusion: the Hebrew Bible honors the epic lineage of King David, that is, Genghis Khan. This is the point in the story where everything falls into place, or becomes impossible to believe. In this sense, if your case is disbelief, I recommend that you start again. In all cases, I encourage you to make an effort. Let them start again as many times as necessary, because there is still more to know, and the mystery of Mary Magdalene remains to be solved. With this understood, let's continue. In a Neochronological language, the bridge between biblical and Tatar facts is not a problem. On the contrary, it clarifies everything. History has been manipulated chronologically, and the sacred text refers to Tatar power, which has been adulterated and in turn deliberately sent to an artificial past. Thus, the first arrival of the Saracens to the west must be understood as the arrival of the powers of Genghis Khan and of the successful exodus of the people of Israel from Egypt. In this sense, following the chronicles written in the name of Genghis Khan, the king of Tartary may well be Bata Khan, who was the grandson of Genghis Khan and founder of the Russian Golden Horde, when he entered Europe with his probable brother Monk Khan, son of the Karaite princess Sorgatani Beki, niece of Prester John of the Karaite lineage. And who was Monk Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, who, according to official history, entered Europe together with Bata Khan? It is the same monk who would later occupy Persia and reach Vietnam with his brother Kublai Khan, who would be emperor of China. Thus, Monk SV is only comparable to that of Alexander the Great. They are, in fact, two equivalent intrusive powers, told as different stories, which are the same. That is, in a colossal conquest, difficult to imagine, this lineage occupies all of Eurasia, up to North Africa, and its leaders proclaim themselves kings of kings, the owners of the world. Thus, they create the myth of the Ark of the Covenant, which Prester John will guard, and, as supreme pontiff, he stands as universal shepherd before his power moves to Rome and mutates towards the power of the Pope. Yes, as you have understood, the power of the Pope is a mutation of the power of Prester John. This thread is then taken up again. Recapitulating, the works of Fernandez de Mendoza, Newton, Nostradamus, and Zuckerman, which have in common a Tatar and Jewish origin in Occitan, Cathar and Khazarian Gothia, speak of the same thing, if we accept that, indeed, the lineage of the kings of Tartary was that of King David. And all these works feed back and reinforce the new chronology of Fomenko and Nosovskiy. That is, the power of the Saracens was that of the kings of Great Tartary and that of the lineage of King David, being a power that occupies Troy, as does Paris, from the legendary tale of Paris and Helen. So, does Troy exist when this episode takes place? And does Paris, the mythical character, have anything to do with Paris, the capital of France? Before, it has been commented that tradition says that the Franks are a people who come from Troy, but is it a medieval Troy? Yes, of course, if it is understood once and for all that this ancient history is the medieval one. For this reason, and no other, the story of the Battle of Troy became popular in the Middle Ages, not before, and its graphic representation is typical of the Middle Ages, with knights in armor, castles, and ships of the time. We find, then, a surprising chronicle that, together with other sources and with the Neochronological fit, points to the Frankish and Provençal power, which is also Tatar and Jewish. As can be seen, official history makes the first count of Toulouse a Frankish and Christian power, of the lineage of Charlemagne, while Nostradamus makes him a Tatar and Zuckerman makes him a Jew and Babylonian. And the three powers are enormous. They are three versions of the same story. But to further complicate historical reality, consensual written history has created an eminently Christian pattern, which leaves no room for reasonable doubt. Where it is known that a Jewish power is born, in Occitania, official history makes Benedictine Christian power flourish, the unique and main monastic model that is the essence of the real Christianization of Western Europe duly documented. According to official history, it is Charlemagne himself who promotes there, in Aniana, next to Montpellier, the Benedictine route that will spread throughout the area of Carolingian influence. Thus, officially, Romanesque art was born in the West, and the well-known medieval monasteries and castles appeared, the same ones that appear in Tatar Gothia and throughout the orbit of the Black Sea. And, next to Aniana, the papacy of Avignon will appear. Even in Montpellier, it is said that the Order of the Holy Spirit of Our Lady of Montpellier was created, which the kings of France would make their own, with its dove descending assimilated to a fleur-de-lis. What are we left with, then? Was it a Christian background, or was it Jewish? Here, without a doubt, is the great manipulation, and if we focus on this reconstruction, it can be said that the Benedictine model, with obvious correspondences with the Cathar, was not as Christian as it is claimed. The origin was Tatar of Jewish essence in an era in which a civilizing space was built based on the cultivation and appropriation of land administered by the community, and then it was Christianized, erasing its Tatar and Jewish past from memory. But the Principality of Narbonne, from which the county of Toulouse was born, had the main Jewish school in Western Europe. It was the school of schools. This, although not popular, is agreed upon among Jewish researchers. For example, the historian Aryeh Grabois has it very well documented. Reference number 6. But this land and the genuine Tatar and Jewish people were defeated. The Jews who did not accept the conversion ended up expelled, and, in the same way, the Cathar crusade was against the Khazars, that is, the Tatars established there. It is the same tragic story as that of the end of the defeated Khazar Khanates, in this case, first by Ivan the Terrible and then by the Romanovs, who put an official end to the extensive and mysterious power of Great Tartary. They seem like separate stories, but no, they have only been separated in official time to distort their meaning, which historians have been in charge of developing. But this is another big topic, which also deserves a separate point. Following Nostradamus, it must be said that it completes the Chronicle of Charlemagne by sending it to Rome, where he proclaims himself emperor and great European patriarch of Christianity. That is, this character is created, like an emperor who appears out of nowhere and supplies the universal power of the Tatar emperor. The result of a distortion of real history, the true history of the Tatar and Jewish, Greek and Roman lineage was hidden to create the power of the resurrected Christ. Charlemagne has replaced the identity of the king of Tartary, or that of one of his sons, as the Neochronology says. Hidden under the name of the Vatican is the power of the true conqueror of Europe, Khan, as the Neochronology has also stated for years. The Vatican honors Khan, who accomplished the feat of conquering Italian Rome, which official history attributes to Charlemagne. It is the result of changing reality to Christianize history. Why? Because Christianity, as we understand it today, did not yet exist. In the same way, Judaism had to define itself before becoming what it is today. For this reason, and no other, much of Jewish history is written in these Western lands, like the Kabbalah. Judaism has its history in Babylon, Persia, and then in the West, then heading to Jerusalem, where the holy tomb of King David, that is, Genghis Khan, is worshipped before becoming Christ. The famous Crusades, which officially founded the Kingdom of Jerusalem in the Middle Ages, were the closest thing to the biblical Kingdom of Israel before the Great Manipulation. And yes, this topic also deserves a separate point. It is then that, from Constantinople, with Troy defeated, Europe is controlled, and its army is that of the Order of the Temple of Solomon. The Hebrews, Jews, Tatars, founded the Roman Empire in Greece before creating the power of Christianized Italian Rome. For this reason, the first completed Bible was Greek and was not Latinized until much later. That is to say, this explains that the papacy of Avignon was not a rarity, in that the papacy of Rome moved there. In fact, a Jewish pontificate was born in Avignon, which later became Christian and moved to Rome. When? When the power of the Greek, Tatar, Emperor of Constantinople, is defeated by the Ottomans, who are, for those who do not know, an eminently Tatar power linked to the lineage of Genghis Khan. Along these lines, when the emperor falls, a priestly school falls that elevates him, like the Protochrist, before creating the myth of the current historical Jesus Christ. All this great manipulation is due, ultimately, to resurrect his power, and thus the Messiah is constructed. For this reason, neither Jews nor Muslims believe in his martyrdom and resurrection. For this reason, the Jews have persisted to the present day. And for this reason, his epic has been sent to great antiquity, and, along the way, an artificial power has been created for Christ and Christianity. The imperial, European, root was Tatar and Jewish, allied with the Greek root, before disappearing and mutating towards Roman-Italian Christianity, and before the histories of France and Spain were responsible for erasing the true Occitan, Gascon past. And Provençal, just as the history of Russia did with its Tatar past, and all of Europe. In its place, another story will be created, eminently manipulated, whose objective will be to make Christ and Rome the maximum power. Thus, real history will be rewritten, in which is much shorter and more recent, and in its place an immense, extensive history will be created, which all historians will follow, as an act of faith, the chronology that will be imposed. The Holy Inquisition will wreak havoc in Europe. Europe will bring the power of Prester John Ethiopia, of the lineage of Genghis Khan, who until then guards Solomon's Ark of the Covenant, to Rome. When? The project of European colonization of the world, after the fall of the Greek Empire, of Constantinople, marks this process. In fact, although it is not highlighted in basic historical education books, colonization officially begins when Portugal, in the official year 1486, on October 1st, sends 2 expeditions to Ethiopia to request the support of Prester John to subdue to the followers of Muhammad. In this undertaking, it is believed that it is the first time that Africa was surrounded by sea, and when the southern tip was baptized as the Cape of Good Hope. That is, the first thing Europe does, before colonizing the world, is ask for the support of the guarantor of the Ark of the Covenant, Prester John, of the lineage of Kings David and Solomon and Genghis Khan. In this sense, there is also correspondence between the Prester and the courts of Italy and the Catalans, with this same address, which also speaks of marital unions, although this union was not officially consummated. On the other hand, it is also known that Christopher Columbus aspired to have the support of the Great Khan of China, that is, from the same Tatar power. Thus begins a second colonizing project with the support of Prester John, just when, according to official history, the Pope of Rome revolutionizes the world and decides to take the place of the Prester, with his authority, and just when the Prester loses it definitively. As can be seen, the power of the Prester will be that of the Pope of Rome. And this colonial project will be the last chapter of the Apocalypse, the only truly prophetic one. That is, the entire story of the 4 horsemen of the Apocalypse and the great destruction that gives rise to an alliance refers to the great Tatar conquest, but the announcement of the future coming of the angel of Jesus, understood as an almighty knight who will return to dominating over the entire earth, is the way in which European Rome presents itself to the entire world, convinced of its success. Thus, Europe will prevail throughout the world, except the Middle East. But, in the end, an agreement will be made with the Ottomans. It is the famous Franco-Ottoman alliance, which lasted until the time of Napoleon, and the Society of Jesus will be in charge of occupying the rest of the empires, including China and Japan, to impose the official chronology. His project was to impose the power of Christ throughout the world, but each empire had created its religion, and all of humanity could not be Christianized. But, likewise, it was possible to create a chronological map to which all powers surrendered. When this global chronological map was created, there was still awareness that all the empires on Earth belonged to the same lineage. Even in America, an issue that also deserves a separate study. And what became of the history of the Western land of the Jews? The Nostradamus family, along with the author of the official chronology, Scaliger, led the great manipulation of history. They were heirs to the Jewish power that they hid, although, probably, they did not really exist. They were created characters. Behind them hides the maximum ecclesiastical and imperial power. In their own way, the Nostradamus refer to Our Lady of Provence, camouflaged as Mary Magdalene. Nostradamus means Our Lady and is the Magdalene. Along these lines, and finally, comment that, in the manuscript of Jean Nostradamus, it is said that Gerard of Roussillon, who married the Carolingian lineage, being Count of Provence and the first Count of Paris, is the one brings Magdalena to Europe. According to this story, and also the official one, he claims the body of the Magdalene and has the church of Vézelay in Burgundy built in her honor, where she will be buried and lies to this day. Vézelay is the most important medieval Benedictine temple. That is to say, the Magdalene appears then, not 2,000 years ago. At this point, the question that comes to mind then is, who really was Mary Magdalene? Was she the wife, mother, or daughter of the king of Tartary? That is, the mother of the Jewish and Tatar, later Christian, lineage of all the powers of Western Europe, probably Karaite, Jewish. This is the true Holy Grail, the true royal blood, and its true history.